My name is Ryan Frantz. I am a senior operations engineer at Etsy. I work remote. Etsy is based in Brooklyn, but I work from home in Annapolis, Maryland. I have previously, prior to Etsy, I've built and managed operations teams. And at Etsy, even as an individual contributor, I still contribute to and help maintain the culture at Etsy. And that's a theme that is going to carry through the rest of this presentation. And it's at this point I want to make a statement that I believe you can be a leader at any level of the organization. You don't necessarily have to have direct reports. You don't necessarily need to be a project lead. While managers and team leads are in a position of influence, without a doubt, it's not absolutely necessary. Leaders are folks that take action because they believe in something. This is Etsy. If you're not familiar with Etsy, we are the largest online global marketplace for handmade and vintage goods. So let's say that this chap right here can cut a mean cross stitch, right? Someone says, that embroidery is awesome, I bet you can make some money from that. You can at Etsy. You can open up a shop, start to sell your wares, you get in touch with other craftspeople. The beautiful thing about Etsy is we are reimagining commerce in ways that provide a more fulfilling and lasting world. And we do that by bringing people together. Bringing people together to sell handmade goods, sometimes vintage goods. And what I really like about it is that thing that you buy is yours. It might look like something else on the website, but it is only unique to you. Someone has made it specifically for you. I think that's fantastic. And our sellers are really small businesses. We're helping small businesses thrive. Let's do some numbers because people like numbers, right? Especially nerdy folks like myself. At the end of fiscal year 2013, gross marketplace sales for Etsy were over $1.3 billion. We'll call it GMS from here on out. GMS is one way that we measure success at Etsy, but it's an easy number to reason about because it's the aggregate sales for all of our sellers. So this is how successful our sellers are doing using our platform. We have 44 million members, 1.2 million of those are active sellers. These are folks that have made a sale, at least one sale within the last month. So we got a lot of busy folks. There are 26 million unique things on the website that you can build. There's some really, really weird things and some really, really amazing things. You should go check it out. And nearly the entire world is represented on Etsy, whether we're talking about buyers or sellers. I think at last count we had about 200 countries represented, which I think is pretty significant. All those people are in touch with each other, right? So you can buy some handmade goods from someone in China. Someone in Thailand can buy something from somebody in Canada. I think it's pretty amazing. I always like to let folks know what to expect from a presentation, and this one's no different. There are a few things that I hope you take away this evening. Number one, the culture is always evolving. It never stops. And you're going to see that as we discuss Etsy's history, where we came from, where we've gone, where we're at today. You probably heard this a lot. Communication is kind of an important thing. And sometimes I think this statement that communication is paramount is overused, but it still is worth saying because we're still not getting it right. And what I mean by that is, when we're talking about communications large, the HR team sends out an email that says, hey, there's a new policy update we'd like to train you folks on, come on down to the cafeteria. Or it's a team member saying, I just worked on this new feature that I released, I think it's really cool, the rest of you should know about it. Or you're talking to the people using your product, using your tools. Every bit of communication is super important to how you're perceived, to how you operate, to how your culture exists. This one's important. There is no divide between managers and engineers. And I'm not advocating right now, I want to be clear, I'm not advocating for a flat topology here. What I mean is that everyone has or should have the same goals. Right? Those are the goals of the business. Whether you're a manager or whether you're an engineer, you're all driving in the same direction. Your responsibilities are different, but you're all working together to make the same things happen. And that's really important to understand when it comes to maintaining and developing your culture. There are folks, I think Alan had even mentioned this morning when he was talking about the car industry in the 80s, that some folks still believe that there were whose management's responsibility, come up with ideas and transform them, translate that into something that the workers could fashion. That is not the case. It's definitely not the case anymore, at least. And finally, the technology you use in your organization, the products you develop, they might be whiz-bang, they might be awesome, and you might be able to attract talent based on that alone. But the thing that keeps people is your culture. When people feel that they are part of this thing and they're contributing to it, they will stay. So before we get into Etsy's history, there are a couple core principles that I wanted to touch on here. Core engineering principles, because we're focused primarily on Etsy's engineering culture. We believe that you just need to get your code out there, because perfect is the enemy of done. You'll never be done if you're trying to make this thing do all the things that it should be doing. We believe that our engineers are going to do the right thing. And part of that is shipping things small and shipping them fast. So every engineer has the ability to push to production at any point in time, any hour of the night if they want to. Now we have some guidelines. We don't want folks being woken up in the middle of the night because a push went bad. We don't want the holidays to be ruined. But sometimes, because systems display emergent behavior, you never know what's going to happen, and you need someone to have the ability to push code at any time of night. Again, we try to avoid that, but we give that access to our engineers because we trust them to do the right thing. But we favor simplicity. Again, we want to ship small things. We want to ship them fast. Because when we do that, we can fail fast. If we fail fast, we learn faster. And we can continue to iterate. This loop will continue once you get to this point. And finally, we measure everything. A colleague of mine, Lord Ness, was quoted as saying one time, if it moves, graph it, and I think he's even amended that to say, even if it doesn't move, graph it, because it probably will. So we measure everything. And the reason for this is when we sit down to have a discussion, we let the data drive it. We let the data drive our decisions. If we're talking about releasing a new feature, and we understand the impact of that feature on conversion, well, we better have some data to explain why we want to move one way or another. Sometimes we need to kill a feature because it has a negative impact on conversion. The data tells us that. This is a really handy graph, if you work at Etsy, showing the number of pushes we do per day. So at the the end of 2009, when we started graphing this, we were doing about 5 to 10 deploys a day. And by the end of 2014, pretty much today, we're pushing somewhere around 50. Sometimes we've gotten up to 70. And that's great for us. But there's a caveat here. This is not an end. So this is an end, not a means. Right? You don't sit down and say, we're going to be a great tech company because we're going to get to 50 deploys a day. Nobody sits down and says that. This is something that comes about as a result of changing your processes to be more efficient. Now, that having been said, if you are pushing code on regular release cycles, say every quarter or so, or once a year, and you say to yourself, we'd like to push more often, then it's reasonable to say our goal is we want to release code, we want to deploy code once a month, once a week, whatever. That makes sense, because there's a business need driving that, hopefully, right? You have a lot of features that you need to get out, and it doesn't make sense to release it on such a long schedule. But in and of itself, getting to 50 deploys a day should not be a goal. So I'm not the first person that's told this story. We had maybe 2012-ish or so, Mike and Betsy and Patrick McDonald had given a talk at the Velocity Conference in Santa Clara, California. And they subsequently followed up one or two more times as recently as last year in Barcelona, where they discussed the evolution of Etsy's engineering culture over a 6-7 year period. There's some slides here. I'll make this presentation available later so you can go watch this. And I hope you do watch the video, you do check out their slides, because portions of my presentation are derived from that. We will cover some of those things, but you definitely go watch those videos. This one's important. This is Etsy's story. You can't take what I'm going to say to you today and think that tomorrow you can just go apply all these things and you're going to be an Etsy of your own. However, I do hope that you can glean some useful information that you can take and help guide you on your path to making positive changes in your organization's culture. So how did Etsy get here? How do we get to the point where someone has actually bothered to invite me up on stage right now to talk about culture? I can tell you it wasn't because somebody set out one day to say, I'm going to make a website and we're going to push 40 times, 50 times, 60 times a day, whatever the case may be. Etsy went from an apartment-based startup in downtown Brooklyn of 4 people to an international organization, 600 plus full-time employees around the world. And this is how it happened. A couple skaters said, we're going to change the world. They knew about this craft community, this burgeoning, it wasn't even a burgeoning craft community, there's just a lot of crafters out there talking to each other at these craft fairs, at these trunk shows. Some had brick and mortar shops, some didn't. There's a lot of talent out there, and nobody was taking advantage of that talent to make money for themselves, to make a living. And these folks thought, we need to find new ways for the craft community to interact and communicate. Let's create this website. It's a forum for everybody in the crafting community to do just that. And it's a very relaxed workplace. This is a skating ramp that converted into standing desks, right? So you could flip a Mick twist, that's what I know because I'm not a skater, and then bash out some code later on. Wasn't always rosy at Etsy. So for a 2 or 3 year period at Etsy, we went from 4 people to about 35. 15 of those folks were engineering, the rest were support staff and product designers, things like that. And it was very, very siloed. Developers did their thing, operations did their thing, everyone else did their own thing. And this manifested itself in a number of ways. Most significantly, we like to talk about this tool called Sprouter. If you were at the earlier presentation by my colleague Dan Schauenberg, he talked about Sprouter. It was intended to prevent developers from accessing the database. So the front-end code would talk to Sprouter. The Sprouter, by the way, is a handy nickname that means Stored Procedure Router. The application would talk to Sprouter. Sprouter would then talk to the database because seriously, you can't trust developers to sling SQL code, right? Right? Hopefully you can. Hopefully they understand enough about the back end when they're writing the code. So Sprouter was designed with that intent in mind to keep the developers developing and not databasing. And this is horrible. And it didn't work for us at all. Towards the end of 2008, we had some management changes. Maria Thomas from NPR comes in. She's brought on as the CEO. And coming from NPR, she brought this notion that community was important. And in fact, that was the whole reason that Etsy even started, because there was a community of crafters out there that a few folks believed needed a voice. They needed a place to sell their wares. And she says, you know what, we need to make community a really strong part of our culture. It's actually, it's everything to us. Chad Dickerson comes on as CTO from Flickr, and he looks at the way engineering is working and says, I see these silos. We're going to burn them down. This is not working for us. Sprouter is a terrible tool, technically, and culturally, we're going to get rid of it. And this is the start of the drive to the Etsy that we know today. Again, it was not all rosy at Etsy. Some things you want to I would like you to take away from that time period is that we had lots and lots of outages. The sellers came to expect it. If the site was unavailable, the sellers would be on the forums, and they would say, it's just Friday at Etsy. Just another day, right? Eventually would come back and they could do the thing. Engineering projects really had limited value because we're just trying to keep the site running. So there wasn't a whole lot we were doing beyond fighting fires. And it was at that time, thanks to Maria and Chad, where we realized that engineering needed to provide value to the community. It wasn't just about building a website and using some technology to make that happen. It was about delivering some value to our community. At the end of 2008, we had 35 employees, and sellers grossed 87, 88 million. In 2009, we started making some really significant changes. Namely, we started encouraging more collaboration between the operations team and the development team through daily stand-ups. And these are time-consuming events, especially as you have more and more people, right? Everyone's schedules are different, and you have limited space, and try to get everyone in, and try to have an appropriate agenda. Everyone's got an opinion, everyone's got a voice, everyone wants to say something. They take a lot of time, but it was better than the absence of that, because previously no one had been talking to each other. And this is really as much about the development team sharing responsibility for code as the operations team sharing responsibility for the infrastructure. We implemented or started what we call the DevTools team. They built some tools, internal tools for us called Deployinator, which we use even today to deploy our entire site. We made some significant changes to the tech stack. We used to use Lighty and I think Mod CGI. And it was a big ball of wax to run the site. We said we're going to standardize on Apache, and we showed up things in our network. And I want to circle back around to the idea of the stand-ups, or what came out of the stand-ups, and that's that being in IT, whether you're development, or your operations, or security, you're at the crossroads of several parts of the organization. And in order to be successful, you, your team, the business, you've got to collaborate. There's no way around it. So we made a big push to hire a lot of folks in 2009, right? Which is why these stand-up meetings started to get really cumbersome. We had to keep up with our growth. And the investment we made in people was about understanding that everyone has their direct responsibilities. You're a developer, your operations, your security. But we all need to take advantage of the fact that there's some overlap between the things that we do. And use that to support each other and the business's goals. And there doesn't need to be a silo. You know some things that I don't know. We both know some things that sometimes we can lean on for each other. And you and I don't know anything, right? At the end of 2009, sellers gross $180 million, which is a little more than double the previous year. So we're being more and more successful with these changes. Our sellers are more successful, more productive. 2010, this is where things really get good. So we already had Chad from Flickr. We bring in a tall guy, Kellen McCree from Flickr, and John Allspaw on the right, the second to shortest person from Flickr as well. And these folks have worked together for a number of years at Flickr. They already had a pattern to the communication. It was basically like a well-oiled machine. And the effect of that was that our technical management, our technical expertise was really short up there. And one of the first things that we did in 2010 was released or launched the CodesCraft blog. If you haven't gone out to read it, you definitely should. The point of this blog was to spread our knowledge. It's codescraft.com. That was easy. We launched it because we wanted to spread knowledge from our engineering knowledge, learnings, and failures to another community, the engineering community, and hopefully learn something in return. We realized we'd solved some big problems for ourselves, and we thought we would share that, because the end result of that is we're going to learn more from other people. And we hope that people take what we've learned and they can get up to speed a lot faster. And again, this is about community again, this time engineers. The work that we do in engineering is just as much a craft. We see it this way. It's just as much craft as someone throwing clay or fashioning bowls out of tiger maple, whatever. There's a lot of effort, a lot of love, a lot of design that goes into this. And that's why the blog is named CodesCraft. We treat it the exact same way that our sellers treat the work that they do. We standardize a lot of things. So the first thing we did was we decided we're going to throw out everything else except PHP and MySQL. Not because we necessarily hated those other things. Python's a perfectly good language. Perl's a perfectly good language, right? Okay, good. Postgres is a fine back-end database. But we had things like, we had MongoDB running in Postgres, and MySQL, and Python, and JavaScript. We had all, basically, someone decided, I'm just going to use this, I'm going to use Node.js for this feature, I'm going to use Python for this, and there was no real standardization across the board. So we said, well, we're a website, and a lot of websites are built with PHP. We're going to do the same thing. We're going to take the learnings from folks that came from Flickr, MySQL works for them, and it's a pretty big website, right? We're gonna do the exact same thing. But again, it wasn't because we hated any particular technology, it was more about standardizing. We stuck with PHP because, well, basically it's a language that's geared towards writing web pages. Anyone should be able to come in, it's a PHP developer, and read and write the code, no problem. In fact, deciding on PHP as the language of choice makes it a very low barrier to entry for finding additional talent. Right, to bring in new people to outfit your culture. We started graphing a lot more things. We're using Ganglia for system level metrics. All of our nodes have a bare minimum number of metrics for CPU, disk, network, so on and so forth. We use Graphite for a lot of business level metrics, which is really important. We want to know how well the conversion rate is, how many people are putting things in their cart, how many people are buying, how many people are logging in, how many people are failing to log in. These aren't necessarily operational concerns, but it's still good to know about. And we made all this information available to everybody that wanted to look at it, whether you're technical, whether you're business oriented, whatever. We made it all accessible. And that data was useful not just to expose everyone to what was happening with the site, what behaviors people were displaying on the site, but we were using that to improve the work-life balance for engineers. In fact, when we had more information available, we found that we were alerting engineers needlessly for faults that weren't even faults. We actually started cleaning out non-use alerts that were waking people up in the middle of the night. So we're starting to see some benefits just by gathering the data and exposing the data. We do that a number of ways. We have a dashboard framework, which is open source if you want to take a look at it. Actually, any of the tools that I mentioned here, if they're open source, you go to github.com/etsy, you'll see them all. We have a lot of them. This is the operations pod. We have 6 flat panel screens up at all times. The top left-hand corner, that's the GMS graph. We can actually see in near real time how much purchasing is happening on the website. In fact, there's a little dial in the lower left-hand corner of that graph that shows how much money sellers are making per second. Every Cyber Monday, we have to increase that dial because the sellers just keep surprising us with how much they're selling. So that it keeps getting paid every Cyber Monday. It's always a guess. We always take bets how far we need to push that odometer. See a bunch of Ganglia graphs and graphite graphs here as well. In the middle, that was a fun one. That was a near real-time display of search queries. So fun fact, Cyber Monday this year, the top search query for items on Etsy, ugly Christmas sweaters. It's a thing now, right? So, again, this is just one example of what we're monitoring. We curate over 800,000 metrics right now. And we have dashboards at the macro level for the business, for the site. We have team-specific dashboards. We have feature-specific dashboards. Anyone can create a dashboard if they want to. And they can add it to the dashboard framework. Maybe only 3 people look at it. Those 3 people need it. And it's there in case we ever need to reference it. I'm probably going to spend a little bit of time on this section here because it really is the launch point, I think, for a lot of how Etsy's culture is developed. Especially on the management ideals. So, how many folks here have outages? Come on now. How many folks have managers in the room? Managers in the room? Okay. All right. Managers, please get them and leave. How many folks have postmortems when they have outages? They review what's happened, why, how to maybe address in the future. Not a whole lot. I'm surprised. Okay. All right. Sharing is caring, folks. Okay. My name is Ryan, and I have outages. All right. There's a small number of hands that have postmortems. How many of you feel like those are blameless in nature? Just a number. Okay. All right. And I do want to spend a little bit of time because this is really critical, I think, to Etsy's culture. And I do like to tell stories. I will try to keep you on time so we can get up to the hall. But the idea behind a postmortem in general is to identify what has happened in an outage. What factors led up to the outage, what happened during the outage, what was done to address the outage. The whole goal is to figure out how to possibly prevent it, or at least mitigate it, or to fail gracefully in the future. The idea behind a blameless postmortem is to recognize that people are not a factor in why something failed. I'll say that again, people are not a factor in why something failed. At least people as rational actors, people who are making decisions based on information or things that they know about the system. Most people don't come in every day to the office and say, I want to blow it up. I'm going to take the site down. I want to make sure that that application does not get deployed to all the satellite offices. And we'll do it while eating ice cream, whatever. Most folks want to do a good job. And so when they're dealing with an outage and they're making what some people would perceive as mistakes, at least in hindsight, they're trying to address the issue. And the whole idea behind a blameless postmortem is to sit down with everybody that was involved, and hopefully other people that are just interested, because maybe they can shed some light on the issue as folks that were not involved. The whole idea behind a blameless postmortem is to get to the heart of the matter, understand what happened, and try to mitigate it. And if you're sitting there blaming people, like that dude was up drinking last night, I saw him coming in, he was leaning on the wall, and he's like, on my computer today, right? And he's the reason, because I saw him near your computer today. It's not going to happen because that person is not going to talk to you and give you all the information that might be relevant to that outage. But if they know that they can walk into a room and no one's going to finger them and consider them to be some evil actor, they will share with you honestly why they made the choices they did. For example, I looked at this graph, and the data said this, and so I decided I need to turn this feature off. Well, that was probably because maybe there was a graphing defect. Maybe the graph didn't update. Maybe the data points were invalid because the graph hadn't been updated in a long time. The graphing system says, I'll just use the last data point because that's what I do. Those things happen, but you're not going to get to that if you're blaming people. So you need to take some time. If you're not doing blameless postmortems, there's a lot of literature on it. This gentleman here, Alan Kraft, is really interested in blameless postmortems. You should check with him as well. And make it a reality in your organization. It's difficult to do if you're not doing it now. And it's scary, but it is totally worth it. One-on-ones between managers and reports are key. Two things. They need to be at least an hour long. You need to keep your schedule. People dig on consistency. And the one-on-one is an opportunity between the manager and a report to talk about whatever they want. And one-on-ones are not unidirectional. It's not the manager asking you, how are you doing? You were out late last night, apparently drinking, and you screwed up the site. It's okay for you to ask your manager, how are you feeling, right? I mean, you seem a little bit stressed today during our stand-up. Is there anything I can help you with? Take off your plate, right? One-on-ones don't necessarily have to be just between managers and direct reports either. It's a really cool thing when you start having one-on-ones with people outside your team, peers, even managers outside your team. You get to learn some additional perspectives about how folks are operating in other parts of the organization. But having that time, building those relationships with people, it's another way that you engender this culture that you want to thrive in your organization. One-on-ones are key. Make them an hour long. Make sure they're consistent. Don't miss them. If you got to miss them, you better reschedule them pretty quick. We started doing engineering. Question?
Well, why do you say an hour long?
I don't think you really get a whole lot of momentum out of half an hour. Otherwise, you're just checking in. What tends to happen is people will look at a checklist. I've even done this. Sometimes I don't feel like doing a one-on-one myself. I'm like, I closed these 3 tickets, made a sandwich, and I broke the site. I like the effect of this. So when you have an hour, and if you can get out of the office, if you're working in the same space, if the two of you can get out of the office, get a cup of coffee, go out to lunch, whatever, it tends to be a lot more relaxed. You don't have to do it all the time, just shake it up, right? Just make it different. That's really helpful too, because sometimes people, just by the very nature of being in the office, people are just in this work mindset, and they're so focused on what they're doing, they may not necessarily cough up the real stuff. And you want to get to the real juicy stuff, right? You want to be Every once in a while, it's good to be vulnerable, right? Yeah.
And how often? Stay between it directly, man.
It really depends on how many reports you have. Usually once a week is sufficient. Some folks like to do it twice a week. If you've got 3 reports, you could probably do that. If you're rocking 15 people in your chart, probably difficult, right? But at least once a week if you can make that happen, right? Engineering career planning was a big deal. It turns out that people who set goals are more likely to be successful at the things that they're doing. And as a result, they're a lot happier. So what we did was we said, these are the skills that you need. Here are the levels, and here are the skills you need at each of these levels. And here's what you can do to progress to that level. Right? So people understand their place in the organization, what they're doing now. They understand what the roadmap is to get to the next level. And they come in and they do good work. Right? They have a context about where they're at in the rest of the organization. Switch over to engineering right now. We started letting the developers be on call. I say let because, believe it or not, they wanted to. Turned out that the operations folks would say, I'm getting paged for this feature blowing up, and I always have to call that team anyhow and wake somebody up. Couldn't we just give them a pager? Does anybody have pagers? How many white? Pager's like saying, it's like seeing the floppy save icon in an application. It's this old holder. Sorry, you're still getting paged. So why not have the developer get paged, right? In fact, the developers would say, when this thing breaks, why do I have to wait for an ops to get paged? Couldn't I just address the issue myself? This is fantastic. Now we're talking, right? Because people are starting to own responsibility and starting to share the on-call responsibility, which is a really nice thing. And in fact, this wasn't operations abdicating on call, just saying, here, take it. It's just, we recognize that there are some cases where it's more effective for the developers, especially when they're pushing out code so often. They're so close to what's happening, as Sidney Decker would call being at the sharp end of an event. They're so close to what's happening, they're going to have more immediate information about what's happening. They can respond faster. The mean time of recovery is a lot lower as a result. We started doing A/B testing as well, and this dovetails nicely with the notion of using feature flags to ramp up new features. If we've got a new homepage layout, for example, we want to understand if this has an impact on people finding the things they need on the site, or an impact on conversion, are people buying more or less. We can do some A/B testing. Via feature flags, we could say, we want 1% of our users to go to this new homepage, 99% over here, and then we could, 1, see if there are any negative impacts on the business metrics. 2, make sure that the system is operating that we want to as well. And as we build confidence, we start to increase that number until we're either 100% or we break it and we have a blameless postmortem about it, right? Schema change Thursday. I mentioned that because we used to have a lot of ad hoc schema changes on a daily basis, and that would wreak havoc. What we decided to do is we dedicated one day, Thursday, schema change Thursday. Sounds like Taco Tuesday. This is where we're going to batch all of our schema changes. In fact, you can submit your schema changes to the DBAs. We have a nice tool called Scheminator where we can stack all those up. But they're all in one place now, so we can execute them all at one time. But even better, we can see there's duplication. We can see where there are needless table alters, where maybe we can do things a little more efficiently. Hey, you missed that index over there. It's going to make things slow. It's really nice to be able to, as a result of this, it was really nice because we were able to stabilize the infrastructure. I think it was about 10 minutes of talking. Sorry about that. Try to keep things moving here. So, at the end of 2010, we standardized our stack. We removed a lot of technologies that we knew they were needless because they weren't providing us value. They were just getting in the way. We knew that we needed to increase the level of visibility within the organization and outside, right, vis-a-vis the Code's Craft blog. We're letting folks know what we're doing, how we're doing it, what we've learned. Developers are taking more responsibility for the code. They're going on call. That's a beautiful thing. It's shared pains, as I call it, but it doesn't have to be painful. And we're making improvements to employees' work-life balance. They know where they fit in the organization. They know what their goals are, what their plans are to succeed at NC. And at the end of the year, we made $314 million together. 2011 was a really interesting year as well. So we started in 2010 as part of getting rid of technologies that were not important. One of them was Sprout. And we started to see the benefits of that long tail. When you start getting rid of things and there's just that one last bit of code that still depends on that ugly back-end system we wish we'd get rid of, that's 2011 for us. Beginning of 2011, Sprout was gone. Right? There's a big party, everyone's happy, we have donuts, champagne, at least donuts. And we can start to focus because our infrastructure is a lot simpler, which means we can reason about it better, which means we can move faster. And we challenge our engineers to do at least one of three things every year. Again, it's about community for us. Etsy is community oriented. Do one of three things. Do them all if you want. Go to a conference. You can speak at a meetup. That counts too. Write a blog post on anything that you're doing. Anything interesting. Or release some open source software. It doesn't necessarily have to be something that we use at Etsy. It would be helpful because it's a really great story to say, hey, we had this problem at Etsy. Here's how we solved it by writing this tool. Let me tell you a story about it in the blog post and then talk about it at a conference. Right? You can do all these things, all three things at once if you want to. And as a result, this also dovetails in with the engineer's career path. And it's another thing that they can do to develop themselves. And as a result, develop Etsy's culture, develop Etsy's brand. It all ties in. And we had a huge backing by the executives, by the management team to do this. I was really pleased to hear that the PTO is using a lot more open source software and they're contributing to it. In fact, as my colleague Dan Schellenberg said this morning, it would be no Etsy if there weren't open source software. So we're using these things. I mean, the least you can do is just give back, even if it's one line of code. And it feels good too, right? Big year organizationally for us because Chad goes from CTO to CEO. Kellen becomes CTO. John Oswald becomes Senior VP of Operations. So what's happened is now our leadership has come from the engineering organization. We are a technology company. We are an engineering company. We are building a tool out of technology for the craft community. So at this point, this is the basis of today's leadership, their technical leadership. At the end of 2011, we had a lot of open source tools. I'll touch on a few here. StatsD, one of my favorites, because I love graphs, I love metrics. This is huge to help you instrument your code. So if you've ever written any sort of code, and you're always curious about how well it's behaving, especially in complex software. Actually, I think all software is complex, to be honest, in the hello world. StatsD allows you to instrument your code. You say, how many times did somebody make a call? How many times did the code make a call to the login code? How many times did this thing fail? How many times did anything happen? Use the StatsD code to send metrics to a StatsD proxy that sits in front of Graphite, and it can sample at 1%, 10%, give you all the data if you want. It can aggregate these things over various buckets, 1 second, 10 seconds, a minute, and you use that to graph the behavior of the application. And it's been so popular that it was initially released, we released it written in PHP. It's been so popular, it's been rewritten in C, Go, I think Ruby, pretty much every language that's available. The idea is you embed this in your code, which is why it's been rewritten in a number of different languages. People like the idea of just being able to put a single call into their code that says, fire off an incremented value, and you're done. It should be really easy. It should be super easy to instrument your code and to get metrics out of it. Log stores, in the same vein, we wanted to get some additional telemetry from our logs. So if our web app is blowing up and Apache is throwing HTTP 500 errors, StatsD is not going to help us. Logster can be taught to know the format of a given log and constantly read the log entries and fire off metrics to Ganglia or Graphite. And from there we can know if we're seeing a spike in failed web calls. Excuse me. Deploying under again is the tool that we use to deploy our stack every day. We still use it. SuperGrep is nice because that in real time will tail all of our logs. And we can filter the things we want to look at. We want to see the API logs, the web logs, or we see what's happening in just Gearman, Memcache, all the above, a small subset of systems lets us tailor. There's so much information coming at you. SuperGrep is nice because it lets you focus on just those things that are important to you. And Scheminator, as I mentioned earlier, is the tool that we use for schema change Thursdays. We can take an entire side of our MySQL shards out, perform schema changes, validate that things are kosher, ensure replication is happening with the other side, bring them back online, take the other one out. All without downtime, all without impact on users. It's business as usual. The engineering team, the engineering organization, the platform that they're building, and how we're developing people, that starts to mature. We're doing a lot more automation, as we introduce Chef at this point. And something I'll touch on a little bit more in a bit is security starts going front and center. Security is not something that exists on the fringe. It's just as important as development and operations. In fact, there is a really good presentation by Nick Galbraith, who used to work at Etsy, labeled DevOps Sec. So it didn't just stop at Dev and Ops. There's a security team out there too, doing things for the business. But the really important question was, how do we implement security in our organization? We've been making these positive improvements. How do we implement security without slowing down, without having a negative impact